So I wanted to take a minute to read you this article and tell you a little bit about Walter Williams. He's an economist over at George Mason University, and he's been very influential in my development of thought. Here he's going to talk about states' rights, and in the context of federalism, it's very important. So as I read it, I'll probably pause and make a few comments to sort of explain some of the things that he might have left unexplained. All right, so here's what he says. The victors of war write its history in order to cast themselves in the most favorable light. That explains the considerable historical ignorance about our War of 1861 and panic over the Confederate flag. To create better understanding, we have to start a bit before the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris ended the war between the colonies in Great Britain. Its first article declared the 13 colonies to be free, sovereign, and independent states. These 13 sovereign nations came together in 1787 as principals and created the federal government as their agent. Principals have always held the right to fire agents. It'd be like Des Bryant, right? He's the principal, and his agent tries to negotiate contracts with the Dallas Cowboys, right? He can fire his agent if he wishes and hire a new one. In other words, states held a right to withdraw from the pact. In other words, secede. During the 1787 Constitutional Convention, a proposal was made that would allow the federal government to suppress a seceding state. James Madison rejected it, saying, "A union of the states containing such an ingredient seemed to provide for its own destruction. The use of force against a state would look more like a declaration of war than an infliction of punishment, and would probably be considered by the party attacked as a dissolution of all previous compacts by which it might be bound." So a dissolution means that they're going to just start ignoring it, right? It's no longer valid. It'd be like canceling a contract, okay? In fact, the ratification documents of Virginia, New York, and Rhode Island explicitly said they held the right to resume powers delegated should the federal government become abusive of those powers. So if the government starts to usurp and take powers away from the states or do things that the states historically have done, they reserve the right to actually break away and reclaim those powers. The Constitution never would have been ratified if states thought that they could not regain their sovereignty. In a word, secede. On March 2nd, 1861, after 7 states seceded and 2 days before Abraham Lincoln's inauguration, Senator James R. Doolittle of Wisconsin proposed a constitutional amendment that read, "No state, or any part thereof heretofore admitted or hereafter admitted into the Union, shall have the power to withdraw from the jurisdiction of the United States." Several months earlier, Representatives Daniel E. Sickles of New York and Thomas B. Florence of Pennsylvania and Otis Ferry of Connecticut proposed a constitutional amendment to prohibit secession. Here's a question for the reader. Would there have been any point to offering these amendments if secession were already unconstitutional? Right? Why pose the amendment to ban it if it's already illegal? So it's pretty clear here that even as late as 1861, it was common knowledge and common thought that states had the power to withdraw and secede from the Union. On the eve of the War of 1861, even Unionist politicians saw secession as a right of states. Representative Jacob M. Kunkel of Maryland said, "Any attempt to preserve the union between the states of this confederacy by force would be impractical and destructive of Republican liberty." Both Northern Democratic and Republican parties favored allowing the South to secede in peace. Just about every major Northern newspaper editorialized in favor of the South's right to secede. New York Tribune said, "If tyranny and despotism justified the Revolution of 1776, then we do not see why it would not justify the secession of 5 millions of Southrons from the Federal Union in 1861. Detroit Free Press: "An attempt to subjugate the seceded states, even if successful, could produce nothing but evil, evil unmitigated in character and appalling in content." The New York Times: "There is growing sentiment throughout the North in favor of letting the Gulf states go." The War of 1861 settled the issue of succession through brute force that cost 600,000 American lives. We Americans celebrate Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but H.L. Mencken correctly evaluated the speech. It is poetry, not logic, beauty, not sense. Lincoln said the soldiers sacrificed their lives to the cause of self-determination, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, should not perish from the earth. Mencken says, it is difficult to imagine anything more untrue. The Union soldiers in the battle actually fought against self-determination. It was the Confederates who fought for the right of people to govern themselves. The War of 1816 brutally established that states could not secede. We are still living with its effects. Because states cannot secede, the federal government can run roughshod over the U.S. Constitution's limitations of the 9th and 10th Amendments. States have little or no response. And so if you recall from your reading, you have these expressed powers in Article 1, Section 8, that outline, I think there's 17 of them, right? Things like the Congress should have the power to establish for the national defense. Congress should have the power to establish a post office, etc., right? Those were the expressed powers. Anything not delegated there, according to the 10th Amendment, any powers not delegated there should have been reserved to the states, right? In fact, James Madison said in one of his Federalist Papers that the powers of the federal government are few and defined in the article in Section 8. And those that are reserved to the states are numerous and indefinite. And in your chapter on federalism, true federalism is where the states are the principal and the federal government is the agent, right? They wanted a federal government to protect them against possible attack from Britain, right? They wanted to make sure that if New York was attacked, that all the other states would pitch in to help, right? That's what they mean by having the federal government establish the military. And then, of course, they wanted a common monetary system, right, to make trade easier among the states. Those are things that the federal government can do, right? But all the other things, it should be up to the states. And then, if you don't like what that state is doing, you have the freedom to migrate to a different state. It's very common, right? It's called voting with your feet, right? So I hope you enjoyed it. Go ahead and look at the discussion questions here, and go ahead and write your discussion. Thanks.